Hello everybody, it's 3 o'clock and this is exactly when we start our session for the day. So my name is Reiners. I happen to be the director of the Institute for Competitive Intelligence, and this Institute for Competitive Intelligence hosting our session today. My guest speaker of the day, that's Mr. Kurt Kobel. Are you in the line, Kurt?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm still here in the line, yes.
So thank you very much. As you can recognize already, we are not sitting here in one studio sharing one laptop, but we are both in Germany, but at different locations. So let me introduce our session and then I will hand over to Kurt for his trade show intelligence webinar. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun as well as interaction with him today. The Institute for Competitive Intelligence, as the name implies, is all about training, education, certification in this discipline of competitive/market intelligence. And obviously, we're always very keen to get the latest, hottest content for you. And one of the many ways we try to achieve this is by invitation of speakers such as Kurt today, and simply discuss how they do competitive intelligence, what is new, what is hot, are there any new trends, approaches to the whole topic, and then of course this will somehow end up in our whole program. Okay, Kurt, let's introduce you to our audience. And
sure, go ahead.
Audience unfortunately can't really open their microphones, would be too many and a bit too noisy, so they can all use the chat function, which is one of the little windows on your screen. So please use the chat function to ask questions either now or later to Kurt. But Kurt, how come that you entered this competitive intelligence theater, as I may say? That's a pretty weird discipline, right?
It's something I kind of slipped into. About the good first half of my career, I spent in electrical engineering. I worked with hearing instruments for many years. So I have an electrical engineer, a bit of an acoustics background. And about 2001, I was living in California at the time when this whole internet bubble burst. And my company was telling me that I had to look for another job. I moved back to Switzerland, and one of our competitors at the time was looking for someone that would monitor the competition. I think neither them nor myself had any idea what we were really in for, but that's now almost 17 years ago. So I grew into the topic pretty much learning by doing, but I did not come from a formal strategy development or CI background. I had more the engineering background.
So could you bring into perspective the kind of company you were working for the last 17, 16 years, and what about the employees number or something like that? So when you enter into your presentation, we have better understanding of what you're talking about.
As I said, until about 2001, I was working for multiple hearing aid companies, and in fact, I did the same thing in 2001. I moved to a hearing aid company in Switzerland by the name of Phonak back then, today known as Sonova. That's the holding company over top of that. And I've actually stayed ever since with them until about a year ago, where I, for both personal as well as professional reasons, I have become independent. I've moved from Switzerland to Germany, and that's where I'm at right now.
Okay, I think your accent gave away your origin already, so don't worry. It's very understandable. But today's topic, obviously, will be trade show intelligence. It sounds a little bit like a James Bond thing, so we can imagine how you crawl at a shop floor and sort of get into some dirty business. So how come that you're into trade show at all? So what's the special topic for the day?
How did I get into trade shows? The the hearing aid industry actually displays itself at 2 major trade shows every year. One of them happens to be in the United States, the other one usually here in Germany. And so as a company, we've attended these trade shows for decades already, but we never really got out of them what we wanted in terms of monitoring the competition. So during the course of my tenure at Phonak, I've attended probably some close to 30 different trade shows, most of them with a team where we've systematically tried to collect information. And that's basically the topic I would like to get into today, really talking out of my experience of these 30 shows, what to do, what not to do, and how to best prepare yourself for it, and so forth.
I think that's the best introduction to your topic of the day. So please go ahead. As I've said before to all our participants in this webinar, shoot over your questions via the chat function, and either in between or at the end of Kurt's presentation, which will be some 20 minutes, we can try to answer them and take it from there. So it's all yours, Kurt.
Okay, thank you, Reiner, and I'll take it right away here into the presentation. Yeah, you know, there's a bit of a delay, so I'll have to wait till these slides are coming up. So you can see here how to get the most intelligence out of trade shows. Already by looking at this title, I've kind of made the assumption that you've already made the decision, I will want to attend trade shows, but I would actually like to take it even a step further. Not where you have to decide first what trade shows, and if I say trade show, I mean this for all sorts of exhibitions or conventions. Actually, any type of exhibition where products or services are displayed, scientific conventions, conferences, and so forth. So you already see there, you have quite a selection of where you could attend one of these trade shows. So I think that's the first step that you have to make. In our case, as I said, we have these 2 trade shows that were given to us. So we never really had to make that decision, although even that has changed over the years, and we might have to attend some different trade shows depending on how the industry is moving. So first of all, on the first slide here, why collect information at trade shows? But before I answer that question to you, I wouldn't mind if all of you, I guess you're here for a certain reason. Why are you here? What are you trying to get out of this webinar here? Simply key that into the chat. Maybe we'll have an interesting collection there afterwards of why you wanted to attend this webinar today. But why do we collect information at trade shows? This is, at least in my opinion, one of the most effective ways to conduct primary research. At these trade shows, you usually have almost all of the 5 forces present. You have all of your competitors there, obviously, if you selected the right trade show. You also have suppliers there, as well as customers. Very often you have new entries to the industry there as well, because that's the first time they get in touch with an industry. Probably the only ones that are less likely to be seen are substitutes to your products or services. They are less likely to be at these trade shows. But already, out of the 5 forces, you have at least 4 of them usually present, all in one place, all in a very short time frame, easy access to them. So I think that's the main reason why this is such an effective way to do primary research. Because if you had to travel to these locations, if you had to make this via phone calls, it's a lot more difficult. At the same time, if you look at the expenses most of your companies are having at trade shows, if you exhibit there, very often they're a substantial portion of your marketing budget. And still many CEOs and many marketing organizations think that or consider that they're not getting enough out of these trade shows in terms of competitive knowledge. So that's one of the reasons why I'm showing you this process, and that's what you're seeing on the next slide right here. So if you kind of fit this into a certain process and follow this convention after convention, you're usually much more likely that you get the results back that you're looking for. So what you see here are roughly the 3 steps you will go through. Believe me, you will not have this process down after the first time you've attended a conference. However, it's a good start. And also this process will, of course, look different for everyone due to budget constraints, resources constraints, and of course, your individual business that you're in. If you look at these 3 stages, you have the pre-convention stage or the planning stage, where my main topic here is start early. Especially if you're not too familiar with the process, make sure you're doing this maybe a couple months ahead of the trade show where you start this process. At the trade show itself, the whole execution phase, there, the main thing is be flexible, because not always are things going according to your plan. Not always is it such that things turn out exactly the way you predicted them. So flexibility is probably the key word during the trade show itself. And then post-convention, the whole analysis and dissemination part, here, I think the credo is be quick, because no one's interested in information from a trade show 2 months later. You have to be prepared to analyze, to consolidate information, and disseminate this in a quick way. So these are the rough 3 steps that you're going through, and we're going to look at each one of these right now in a bit more detail. So the first one is this pre-convention stage, where you're collecting and consolidating so-called kits. These are the key intelligence topics, and what we've traditionally done is we've gone out to key stakeholders within the corporation and asked them, what are the things that you're interested in, so that we can maximize our time at a trade show. These shows are usually just 3-4 days long, or sometimes only 2-3 days long. So you don't have tons of time. So you have to really be efficient at the show. So make sure you're collecting these kits, these key intelligence topics right at the beginning. And I'll have a bit more details on this in just a second. Also, what we've done is we've usually intensified our research in terms of what's coming from the competition as we were going into these trade shows, meaning that when you walk onto the trade show floor, you have about a 95 to 98% quote already of the stuff that you know. So you know what your competitors will be displaying there. You know the products that they're introducing. So by intensifying your research, you can really get this down so that you're not going to run into huge surprises at a trade show. Then the next thing is you can prepare so-called convention previews right here. These previews are also usually quick presentations, quick notes that you can publish on your intranet, for example, or if you have a competitive intelligence portal of any sort, you can pre-inform everyone of what's coming. That also helps you get prepared for the show yourself. Then, of course, you need a collection team. Yeah, as I said, sometimes due to resources or resource constraints, you're restricted to having to do this by yourself. But often you have some product managers or you have other marketing staff that is literally hanging out at the trade show also. Give them jobs. Also related to these kits, right at the top, so that they're looking for specific topics, because there's nothing worse or more boring than just walking through a hall of booth after booth after booth, and you're not really knowing what you're looking for. But if someone gives you a job and tells you to look for this or look for that, it also makes the shows more interesting for your own attendees. Then, of course, you need to gather these people first. You need to train them and brief them before they walk onto the trade show floor. And I'll have a few topics on this. And then, of course, the logistics, they're not to be neglected right here. The logistics of hotels, travel, familiar yourself with the venue there. That is an important one, that you do this ahead of time so that you're not lost when you get to the trade show yourself. If you're fortunate, and we had that case throughout many years, we had a department that took care of all of this. They booked rooms for everyone at the trade show. But even these people, they're not really happy if you come 2 weeks before the trade show, telling them that you still need a room for half a week. So make sure you're planning this early. Now we move over to these kits in a bit more detail. These key intelligence topics, as we call them, we usually collected them about 3 to 4 weeks prior to the convention. Not to say that in your case, you might want to do this at an earlier stage if you're not familiar with the process. We've had templates over the years. We had a process of how to consolidate these kits after all. So we were able to manage this in 3 to 4 weeks. If you do this the first time, probably 1 to 2 months is more, a month is 2 months. Excuse me, is more likely the right time frame. So make sure these topics are relevant and realistic, so that it's really what these key opinion leaders within the company, these key stakeholders are telling you. Sometimes they come up with the craziest ideas of what you could gather. And so you have to manage these expectations a little bit. A good question I always use back if I collected these topics from stakeholders was, well, if you had to find this out within your own company, where would you go and look for it? Because sometimes they really came up with very unrealistic expectations as to where you really needed access to the ERP system of your company to figure that out. And so the question going back to them said, how would you find this within your own firm? And they then had to tell me, oh, I don't know. That usually helped us to stay in a realistic time, in a realistic frame here. Then generally we split them up in 2 types of key intelligence topics. So there was the more strategic ones where we had the same questions for every competitor. We would also repeat them show after show. Things like, how do they position themselves? How do they brand themselves? What's the degree of their presence at the convention? Is it that they're spending more and more year after year, or is it that they're slowly transitioning out of these exhibitions? So these are kind of the same questions we've tried to answer show after show, and where the value really was in the timeline afterwards. Then on the other side, you have more tactical questions on each competitor, or that are usually different by competitor. They're also often more accurately described. So, for example, when is a certain product launched in a particular market? What is the next step within their product pipeline? Because we knew they were up to something. So these were the more tactical issues. And then first and foremost here, rate them. Make sure that you have some sort of an importance rating on them, so that you're not trying to go after everything at the end and then you've missed the important questions. So much to the topic of kids. A quick word on elicitation techniques, and probably given the time frame here, we'll have to run through them relatively fast. First of all, use your connections that you already have within an industry. It's always easier if you can actually base the new person you're talking to off of a connection you've already had. It gives you a lot more credibility if you do so. Then direct questions, they're usually a conversation killer. Don't go right for that revenue figure or for the problems they had with a certain product. Make sure you use the 5 W's first in order to state your questions. Otherwise, you kill a conversation really quick. Information that is unknown is more valuable than information that is known. So if you pretend, for example, that information is known already, usually people are much easier to give away something to you that you're looking for. Give you an example. I had a financial analyst, whenever he asked me questions about our company, he would always tell me that, oh, your CEO told this in the presentation. What do you say about this? Or told that in his presentation. What's your opinion on that? I have my great doubts that our CEO ever said anything about these topics, but he pretended to make these things known. In other words, I'm not giving away any secrets. And that was a good technique, which unfortunately I knew of, so I still wouldn't give him his answers. But that's something that you can use very often. Avoid, of course, words like competitive intelligence, analysis, research, proprietary, confidential, legal. Whenever you use words like this, immediately you scare someone off. So that's definitely a big no-no. Then pay attention also to nonverbal messages. We could probably do an entire course on body language here. So I think we'll have to skip over this a bit. Flattery works wonders. If you compliment someone on their new product, on a great marketing campaign, they're also much more likely to talk to you than otherwise. Use pauses and repeat words. So if you're quiet for a while, for a second, that always helps to get another person to talk. Or if you simply repeat what they're saying or repeat their body movements, that is usually complimenting them so that they are much more likely to talk. Then, of course, be prepared. And by that, I mean, not only know the person you're talking to, but also really are sure about what is it that I want from this person. I think in human intelligence, you learn that very often people prepare for the person that they're interviewing, but they're not really sure exactly what they want to get out of the conversation. So really memorize your kits and make sure that you're asking the right question. However, even if you have memorized your key intelligence topics or key intelligence questions, don't ask them directly. Similar to the avoiding certain words, this is a big no-no and can get you into a lot of trouble. Then, of course, first and foremost, do your collection ethically. Don't pretend to be someone else. Don't disguise yourself according to skip guidelines, for example. Although not an elicitation technique, but very important, take notes. After every interview, after every discussion you had with someone on the floor, try to write these things down. After doing this 8 hours at a trade show floor, you will not know anymore what you've talked about 9 o'clock in the morning. So please take notes. So next step is, and I see we're running a little short on time here. Next topic is at the show itself. One of the things we've always done there is we've prepared our booth staff. Often we had sales meetings with our staff that was at our own booth. for two reasons. A, very often they don't get to visit the entire show because they're usually locked up at their own booth. So they don't know what's shown left and right. And they also don't know what our competitors are showing there. So for that reason, we try to brief our own staff to make sure they know what's going on, and they also have arguments against the competitive displays that are at the convention. Then, of course, do your information collection during the convention. There, follow your plan and adapt to changes, just like I said in the beginning. Also important is conduct regular debriefings. Debriefing meetings, inform in between at the booth. Make sure that the information that you've collected already is spread amongst your team, such that you're not collecting information the same over and over again, and you forget other things. But often what happens is when you're at the show, it actually starts before the show even opens. I usually travel 2 to 3 days before the show starts, so I can inform the booth team. I can also have, when I have an exhibitor pass, for example, I can enter the floor earlier when still everything is set up. At that point, I can still look at our competition and make sure that we're not seeing any surprises, and if so, inform the team right away again. So that's why I usually travel there a few days earlier. Then at the convention itself, we usually did this with about a team of 10 to 15 people. I realize that is a luxurious situation, but we've worked our way up there, I guess, because our information collection and dissemination was so successful. We got to get help from teams that are not necessarily part of your CI or competitive intelligence, the market intelligence team. They are just product managers, as I said. Sometimes engineers do a very good job in collecting some technical information. Everyone else that you have at the show. Divide those key intelligence topics amongst that team. Of course, also look at their backgrounds and personalities. So I give the technical questions, obviously, to the engineers, and someone from marketing has to look at the branding and positioning of the different booths. And that's how you send your team out to the convention. As I said before, document what you see and hear. And that means take a little notebook with you, and I don't mean a computer, a little book and paper, write down things. As I said, after every interview, maybe take a camera with you. This used to be quite of an issue in that, especially in the United States, a lot of times taking pictures was not allowed at trade shows. But thanks to smartphones nowadays, where everyone has a camera with them, this has become completely uncontrollable. And so taking pictures at a booth is basically not a problem anymore these days. And then, of course, make sure you know your kits, your key intelligence topics. You have them usually on a piece of paper, and take those with you and memorize them. A few words on how to attend a trade show. My credo is dress accordingly. You see me here. At one time, I just showed up in regular street clothes, jeans, big camera. I was left alone by everyone. I didn't disguise myself. If anyone asked who I was, what I was doing, I would, of course, disclose the company I was working for. I would not hide or anything. But this was already somewhat questionable, I have to say, because a lot of people knew me and kind of wondered, what are you doing? Because normally, this is the way I would attend these trade shows. So you show up in suit and tie, and I think one of the biggest things is make sure you fit within the crowd. You don't wear something that draws attention. And that was actually the problem with the first one that you see here. Also, occasionally, we had different days. Some days where things were very busy, and where no competitor really wanted to talk to you. Where no competitor wanted to talk to you. Let me see. I think I have to close the door here for a second. So during these days when the floor was busy, that was usually the day when we would collect marketing material, brochures and stuff. We would not try to talk to people because that's the last thing you want to anger a competitor, that while they are trying to talk to their customers, you distract them with your questions. So then maybe at a later stage when things got a bit more quiet, that's when we would move in, we would blend in, dressed like any regular attendee at the trade show, and that's when we would talk to the booth staff of our competitors. Certainly, one of the things that you should never do, that's this one right here. Certainly, don't disguise yourself. Always don't pretend to be someone else. That's definitely the wrong way to do, and it's certainly completely unethical. As I said, meet regularly. But not on the show floor. We always had a room, maybe not a war room like what you see right here, but we had regular debriefings that we did once a day, where we would meet at a team, exchange the information that we found, also very helpful in order to write reports afterwards, so that you knew exactly what was collected already and what was not. So the last step then, post the convention, is that's when you finally get the rewards of everything that you've collected. You can do this in face-to-face presentations, online presentations. You can write individual reports. What we've also done, we've informed occasionally individual key stakeholders with their questions that they had. We would also, and that was often the case, kind of work as an information broker, in that we would coordinate the exchange between the collectors and the stakeholders. And what do I mean by that? So let's say, for example, a particularly technical issue was covered by an engineer. Rather than this engineer trying to explain this to me, and I would then write it in a report and disseminate it to the according stakeholders, I would get these people together such that the stakeholder would be able to talk directly to the engineer. And so even though the information bypassed me, it got into the right hands. And so that was one thing that we've done very often. Just one last word on this. When you do create disseminate this information, be creative where you can apply these gained insights. That can range all the way from the C-suite. That was the 2 times out of the year where I got an entire hour out of our CEO and CFO, in that I was actually able to present them our findings, our views of what's happened at a trade show, often related with the state of the industry or the state of our competition at the time. It can go all the way down to individual departments that are usually never allowed to leave the company grounds and don't know what happens outside in the world of their industry. So be creative in where you apply that gained knowledge. And as I said, when you do so, be quick and prepared with your trade show reporting. So make sure you have your reports and presentations ready. Often we've worked with templates, or we worked with previews. We've also split up the job, of course, within the team, that if everyone that has attended the show just writes you a few lines of what they found, what they've seen, it's a lot easier and quicker for you to assemble an entire report or put presentations together than if you had to do all of this by yourself. Yeah, as I said, use templates, previews. Very often what happened in our case is that we had a presentation that we did before the trade show, And often we only had to enhance that exact preview report with the actual findings, put some additional pictures to it, and we had a final report. So sometimes, I think that the last trade show we did just back in October, the doors of the show closed on Friday. The first presentation was on Monday afternoon. So this would have been absolutely impossible if we had to start from the bottom on up. Individualize. What I mean by that is, of course, tailor the information to your specific audience. When I was talking to the CEO, I certainly didn't have the same set of slides as if I would talk to some of our engineers, for example. So make sure that you have your information there ready and individualized for the audience you're talking to. So that's the quick run through, and I think I'm already have taken longer than I should have. So to sum it all up, not really? Okay.
You can still summarize, don't worry.
Okay. Conclusion is, again, yeah, when you start preparing for a trade show, make sure you're early enough, you train and practice your team, you know what you're looking for, you know that you're going to the right show. With that, if you do this for the first time, maybe start 2 months prior to the show. If you've done this over and over again, 3 to 4 weeks might actually be enough. Then during the execution phase, use the power of your team. I hope it's more than just one, but also be creative in who could help you and support you. You'd be surprised how many people actually are able to help you with something like this, so that you get a good team together. In my case, as I said, Reiner was asking me before we ran into the presentation, well, how did I get to the topic of trade shows? And I said, well, yeah, as I explained, I did many of them over the years. And after 30 trade shows nowadays, I don't have to collect information anymore because everyone knows you after this time. So I have to rely on a team. I'm simply the coordinator in the background. I talk to a few key opinion leaders, but certainly no competitor would tell me anything no more these days. So that's why that's where I have to really use the team at this point. Last point, of course, then, yeah, enjoy the reward. In our case, it certainly was such that we never had so much insight during the course of a year as we had after these trade shows. So that's why I got the time with the CEO. That's why I was able to walk into almost any department and present our findings that we've had. As I said, be creative in where you can apply that insight, and enjoy the reward there. I know for myself, speaking for myself, this was always one of the funnest parts of my job, covering these trade shows, disseminating, analyzing the information afterwards. If you do this a few times, I'm sure you will probably look at it the same way. On the last slide, and we're not going to go through this here in detail, it's just a summary of all the points that I've brought up today, such that if you're ever going to need them, you have them on one single slide here. And that basically brings me to the end of my presentation. Here, what I've got is the Conference and Trade Show Intelligence book by the Competitive Intelligence Foundation. This is a really handy book that I have. It's about 200 pages and really goes into all details and all sorts of tricks and has lists of possible kits and so forth. Very, very helpful if you do trade shows. Also helped me a lot to put our process together over the years, so certainly something I can recommend. If you have any further questions at some point, that you can either ask them right now. I hope Reiner has a good collection of questions by now. If you would like to contact me, however, via LinkedIn, you see the link right down here. If you want to contact me, if you do so, maybe mention that you have listened to me during this webinar right here Otherwise, I get many requests from people I've never heard of that I'm usually a little hesitant to agree to contact them right away. So that brings me to the end, and hope Reiner has a bunch of questions now.
Sure. So thank you very much. I'm afraid we can't applaud you, but I think this has been a pretty comprehensive as well as a well-proven way of talking about trade show intelligence. So indeed, continue to send questions. I will now read out some of them and then take it from there. Number one, how well known is trade show CI compared to classic CI consulting? Is it a minority interest?
Is it a minority interest? Speaking for myself, certainly not. I always had the chance of going to conferences. I got a lot of support within the company. If that's the case for everyone, I don't think so. I think a lot of people still underestimate the power of the information that you have at a trade show. Does that answer the question?
I think, and to be fair enough, one had to add here that it depends very much on your industry. And some industry trade shows have really gone down to marketing presentations, so a bit of a PowerPoint slideshows, and not real product exhibition, not real customer sales talks, and of course no prototypes or anything on display. Then obviously the whole idea of a trade show and exhibition has gone down to trade. So I'd argue in some industry it's very relevant whenever you see real stuff, real products, real prototypes, obviously, and if there's a sales kind of related activities, i.e. exhibitors have to show off, have to talk about the future, have to bring up what's new, what's hot, and all these kind of topics. So if I add from my perspective, it's definitely pharmaceutical industry with all their scientific conferences and usually trade shows next to it. It's all about the kind of machinery industries. Take the Drupa, the print machines exhibition in Düsseldorf every 4 years. It's really where the whole industry meets, and then of course a lot of information is simply there and nowhere else.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, that for me personally, a lot of these trade shows were not that interesting at the different booth anymore. Partially, because they wouldn't tell me much, but also because, like the same reasons that Reiner mentioned, they've become pure marketing displays, and you can find that off the internet as well. But the other side that's really interesting for me is that, as I said, there's almost 4 of the 5 forces are at these trade shows. And one of the best sources for me nowadays is not competitors, but suppliers and customers. These are both groups that talk to our competitors and know a lot about them. And that's where I find out really how well is a competitive product doing or not. Because the competitor is always going to tell me it's doing great. If I ask someone at the booth, well, how is your new product doing? I can predict the answer 99.9% of the time. But your customer might tell you that, no, it's not doing that well. I have problems with it. Or the supplier might tell, well, they didn't purchase parts the way we've expected them. So from these people, which also attend the same trade show, I usually get a lot more out of them than the actual competitive booth.
Right. And here's the next question, somehow related to that. Which industries are adopters, obviously, of this notion of trade show intelligence? Do you see a trend? Do you see some new ways of collecting information coming up?
No, I think certainly don't see new ways of information collection at trade shows. Do I see particular industries that are more successful with trade shows than others? I think I have a narrow view on this. But as Reiners mentioned before, one of the problems is these days that many of these trade shows are lacking audience or lacking interest. And so it could be if you are in an industry where that's the case, that maybe trade shows aren't that interesting anymore. The one thing, of course, that you can do, and we've actually gone through exactly that discussion a year or two back, in that we see the same thing with our trade show, less and less attendees, especially in the United States, not so much in Germany, but so that we got to the point where we asked us, well, are we at the right trade show? Should we go to consumer shows where some of our competitors are displaying, where some products that might enter our market are being displayed? And so I think you always have to keep an open mind and look at other trade shows that might also be important to your industry. I don't think it's trade show per se. It's maybe the particular trade show you're going to. That's the wrong one. Right.
And again, add some ideas. New, at least for me, were new for this kind of venture capital-driven trade shows, especially for biotech startup companies, where you have a market square and people simply shop around with money in the bags and looking for new ideas. That's definitely a good hunting ground. But then it's very, well, flexible in terms of you don't know who will be there, you don't know what will be really coming up. So think about formats of people coming together, and not the traditional trade show necessarily, but a bit of a presentation, bit of a conference, bit of a business meetup, bit of a venture capital gamble game, and then these formats might be the next generation of events where you might want to check out whether you find interesting information. And of course, think about regions where you don't have this kind of very good statistical secondary information. So think about Africa, think about some Asian countries, where I'd wonder how you could collect any information to start with. So if there is a trade show, it's a kind of must do anyhow. If you get good information, that's another issue, but at least then this might be more relevant for a CI professional.
Yep.
Yeah, and let's move on to the next
question.
Post. Yeah, here's a comment, more or less, not really a question, telling us instead of taking notes when you're at a trade show and trying to capture what you've learned, I usually record a short memo on my phone. It's a pretty useful hint.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. If you disagree with any of my statements, or if you have more modern methods of recording your findings, hey, please do so. No question.
Yeah.
It's probably not so ethical if you turn it around and record within a booth. That's probably more of a problem. But if you're recording your own findings that way, perfect.
Which is, again, I think you raised this point of having an immediate debrief after a conversation, so valuable information doesn't get lost. I know some companies simply have a telephone number with an answering machine, so anybody can call in and simply, blurs out whatever they've just heard, learned, seen, and then later on they will be debriefed. But just to get over this first 10 seconds of short-term memory, I guess it's a good idea to have something like that. And again, it might be a dictaphone in your hand, might be the kind of scribble notebook, whatever takes you to the next level is acceptable here.
Yeah. I mean, I literally walked around like detectives in the movies with a little notebook for many years. Nowadays, I write everything onto a tablet. Even handwriting there, because I can actually read that into a report relatively quickly afterwards. But basically, I mean, the technique as to how you do it, that's up to you. But my point is more, do it instead of forget about it. Because you're going to have so much information, so many discussions, interesting discussions, you will not be able to memorize everything.
Right. Okay, here's the next question. What is the mentality of CI bias towards commissioning trade show intelligence?
Can you repeat that again?
What is the mentality of CI bias? So somebody who wants to outsource, I guess, competitive intelligence collection towards commissioning trade show intelligence. So I guess the idea is how often do you get a project like that? You are asked to collect information. Is it really something you can outsource? I mean, you made the point of having developed it in-house over years, but you can assume you can't hop around the whole globe and attending trade shows all over the place. Yeah. How do you organize?
I think that's the point. If you have a couple, 3 trade shows a year, you can probably do this yourself. If it's more than that, you're probably going to have to outsource this at some point. Outsourcing, of course, always has the issue of you have to familiarize someone with the industry first. If you're using the same agency, however, and we've not done this with trade shows, we've done this with other areas where we've used the same agencies for years. And at some point, they know more about your industry than many of your competitors. So I think this is an absolute valid point. If you don't have the staff resources yourself, of course, it requires the financial resources, because I don't think that's going to come particularly cheap. Trade shows are usually long hours, because it's not just the show time itself where the floor is opened. It's oftentimes afterwards in the hotels, in other presentations that are surrounding the trade show, where you get information. And so it's financially, not something that comes cheap, put it that way.
Yeah, but if it's worthwhile, you have to.
If it's worthwhile, yeah. If you can't do it yourself, I would think it's worthwhile, put it that way. Because I always collected so much info from these rows.
Yeah, and I'm 100% certain there are some specialized consultancies out there who do nothing but that, especially again in a pharma environment with kind of scientific background. But of course, they work for anybody who pays the check. So there might be an issue of loyalty and sort of how much can you really give away when it comes to monitoring your competitors, assuming they might be working sooner or later for your competitors again. But that's a bit of a difficult question. Here's another add-on idea, by the way, for this idea of capturing what you've heard. So here, one participant argues that they use WhatsApp among their colleagues at a trade show. So that's an easy way, of course, to synchronize and share news and have a little meeting setup or whatever it takes. Yeah, thank you. That's another good idea. Next one. How to counter CI at a trade show. So now turn it around. If you're exhibiting and somebody might be coming close to your booth.
I mean, that was usually when I did talk to our sales staff before they went to the booth. That was part of my discussion there. Make sure that you identify who you're talking to. Make sure that if for example, financial analysts, you immediately direct them to the investor relations department. Don't give away anything. The regular presentations that you do at the booth, you can talk to a competitor about that too. I mean, while you're presenting your products to thousands of visitors at a show, how can you expect that you can hide it from a competitor? As soon as they start to ask too many detailed questions, and you've identified them as a competitor, I think that's the point where you have to stop. But that's something that people have to recognize first. And I would guess that if someone really trained, and in our case, we're fortunate that our competitors weren't that trained, we usually recognize these people quickly. And as long as it was within a reasonable, within reason what they've asked for, we would answer them. But as soon as it got into product details that we would not want to make public, then of course we would have to send them away. That you would just generally send competitors away, I don't think that's a really good practice, because you might be glad if half an hour later you can walk over to their booth, which is another thing that we've done often. If we have identified someone as a competitor, you would give him the regular marketing spiel and then ask him, well, can I come over to your booth anytime?
Yeah. Right. Here's another question. How do you validate unique information collected at a trade show, even though it might be just cheap talks or rumors?
Yeah. What we have done often with specific topics that you also have to identify in your key intelligence topics, that we've actually gone in there multiple times with different people. Because one of the things that we find is, especially on brand new products, very often you can also see how well or poor the staff has been trained on a new product. Because very often they would give you completely different answers on the same questions. Or sometimes they would make up answers simply because they didn't know. Very often they were shown a PowerPoint presentation about what they were supposed to say 3 days before, and that was it. They didn't know anything more. And so that's how we validated it, by going in multiple times with different people. At the same time, you still have to make sure you're not making it too obvious that you're interested in a specific topic. We've had it a few years ago that one of our own booth was questioned by a group of people, not all coming at the same time, all had the same Danish dialect. That's where most of our competitors are sitting. And they were asking and drilling questions on the same topic over and over and over again, which was the dumbest thing they could do, because we knew exactly what they were up to afterwards.
So beware of the Danes. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
But do you have any...
I hope we have no Danish listeners on the line here today.
Well, by now they're all left. Okay, now. What about some anecdotal evidence for success stories at a trade show? I guess kind of appetizer for somebody who wants to promote this issue within his or her own company. Anything you can give away or share, or you read in a book, if it's not your own company, of course, which might be confidentiality issues.
That's no, I don't think there would anything be that is confidential. I have to think about this one for a second. A good anecdote.
I give you a few seconds, and I can throw in one. Given that Drupa, this printing machinery exhibition where I was active several times, we were sort of lucky to get even some patent infringement covered at the trade show, because there at this trade show they really run their real printing machines. So they clone, for example, when they have visitors coming to their booth, open demonstrations, that they have invented a certain technology, which of course was for the company I was representing an infringement of a patent. So this is a lot of examples where you can see a real machine working in front of you. And obviously that's something you can use in a trial against the company if they make a claim which you feel is not really valid. So again, here trade show is a unique place, because otherwise you couldn't sneak into a customer's installation and really see what they do with these machineries. So this might be one anecdotal evidence, or given again this kind of uniqueness of a situation. So did you come up with something?
Yeah, I did come up with something in the meantime. Okay. A couple, 3 years back, we had a competitor. We knew about a product that they were introducing. Interestingly enough, and we knew this from our pre-convention searches, but interestingly enough, they did not show the product at the booth. So I was actually questioning my counterpart, which I knew there, about this new product. And she was a little surprised that I even knew about this. But we didn't know where it was being launched. And she would only tell me, oh, yeah, in relation to that product, I have to go and I'll travel over in Europe somewhere, but I can't tell you where. And a colleague of mine was also talking to her on a completely different note. And to him, that product was never a topic. they would just casually talk about what they were doing and when she came from the US to Europe and that she's going to travel to Poland right afterwards. And so in one of our debriefing meetings when we talked to each other, oh, did you talk to her? Yeah, she told me this, she told me that. Then we knew exactly where that product is being introduced. That's, I think, where the power of the team comes together,
Right.
so that we could take some countermeasures there.
Okay, I think we're pretty much done. It's an hour, but there's a final question, and you can click, please, to the latest slide. There's a good request for your website. So do you, on this very slide you have now up and running, there's no website of yours. Do you have any?
I don't have a website at this point.
Okay.
As I said, the best way to contact me and to contact me for my services is via LinkedIn. If you have something, for example, related to trade show intelligence, that's certainly a topic. I could probably not do it myself because I'm just a single person right now. But if you needed some training on how to set up your trade show intelligence program, that's definitely something I could help with.
Okay, but now let's not go into the sales pitch because this is pretty much the last slide coming up now.
Yeah.
Where we have some more events highlighted for you. But
yeah, I think I'll leave that up to Reiner again.
Yeah, so this is pretty much where you have more trainings coming up. Have a look and check out our website. There was another request for the availability of your slides. Will you send it to people if they're interested?
Obviously, yes. Yeah, I mean, certainly. There's nothing on there that's top secret. If you wanted these slides, make a quick request possibly to me on LinkedIn, and I'll forward those to you.
Yes, and we'll archive this very session on our Insight Center section on our website. You see the first URL, www.competitiveminds.intelligence.com, and then you'll find the very session that we're talking about in a few days, hopefully. Okay, Kurt, we're done. Swiss timing here, 1 hour. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Reiner, for giving me the chance to talk to you here, and
it was a
enjoy the rest of your day.
It was a very good presentation. Many people really had a good time here. So everybody, have a nice morning, evening, afternoon, night, wherever you are, and hope we'll run into each other sooner or later again. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.